Hello everyone, how's it going? Elliot here again. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the LDK game. Now this has actually been out for a couple of weeks now. If you haven't seen one like this before, then you might be familiar with the more square one. In terms of specifications, which we'll get onto in a moment, they're exactly the same. So you can either choose to have a really uncomfortable square little wedge, or you can have something far more familiar, which is actually reminiscent of other consoles we're used to seeing. So yeah, big thank you to my friend Brandon for sending this out to me. It's not sponsored by Brandon, but thank you very much, Brandon. Obviously, recently we've had the release of the Pocket Go, which is another very similar device. It's going to be very difficult to make this video because this isn't strictly a comparison between the Pocket Go and the LDK game. There's going to be a few things that we'll talk about difference-wise in a bit, but this is not an absolute side-by-side comparison. Doing that sort of video would take a very long time. For now, in this video, we're going to be taking a look mainly at the LDK game. So, this is it right now. It does emulate pretty much any console that you're going to want to play. Retro console, you're not going to be playing PlayStation 4 and Switch on this thing. But yeah, as you can see, it's in a very nice sort of form factor, that horizontal sort of style that we're familiar of seeing. They've also whacked an analog stick on there. But yeah, so on the side, it has 64-bit OS. It supports arcade, Game Boy Advance, Famicom, Super Famicom, Sega game series, but that's just a really, really brief sort of summary. This thing plays a lot more than just that. Ultra large capacity, supports TF card. So what it means by ultra, they've actually spelled that wrong. They've got UITRA, large capacity, supports TF card. It actually has two micro SD card slots. There's one with the main SD card, which actually comes on this thing, which has all the firmware and stuff. And then there's another slot for another card, which is just expandable storage, which you can have up to 128 gigabytes micro SD card in there. So that's going to be useful for people who are really playing this thing a lot and filling it up with loads of different ROMs. Supports multilingual language. So that's, don't know why they even bothered putting that on there because most things do that. Another important thing to mention as well is the price. The LDK game comes in at over £60 on some websites, and then the Pocket Go comes in at around 35. So you're literally paying double for the LDK game. Now that's something you really need to remember. £35 for this thing. It had a few flaws, the main one really being the screen tear, but that's just a crucial thing to remember when it comes to these reviews. On that video, I claimed that it was the best Game Boy of 2019. In my opinion, that point still stands. I'm still yet to see something that's really going to push past that. We also had the release of the GPI case this year, which is an absolutely excellent thing, but it's over £100 and requires some serious software engineering. And if you're not really used to Raspberry Pi stuff, it's quite difficult. So putting all that stuff to the side, I am going to go off on a few tangents in this video because there's so many things to cover and I seem to upset everyone no matter what I do. So I am going to try and cover as many points as possible. Nice packaging, pretty standard. Nobody really cares about the packaging. Inside we have an AV cable and a micro USB to charge. Taking a look at the actual device then, and it's very nice. It comes in a few different sort of color schemes. We have this clear one with the Super Famicom styled SNES buttons on the corner, and then there's also a yellow one and a smoky black one. I'm personally a huge fan of the clear one. It looks a lot more sort of modern and techy and high powered and cool, and I just really like that. Compared to the Pocket Go, it's pretty much exactly the same size. It has a bigger screen, an analog stick as well, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Looking a little bit further around the device, we've got a start and select down in the corner. Everything feels very nice. It feels pretty authentic to the original Game Boy. The rubber membranes are a little bit sturdy and rigid, but that will all ease up over time. Next up, we have the L and R button. Quite clicky little things. Some people really like the really powerful micro switch L and R buttons. I'm more of a fan of the ones like the Pocket Go. These are a little bit more silent and feel a little bit more authentic to like a Game Boy SP, for example. The D-pad is pretty damn good. Feels very comfortable. We've come a long way in Chinese aftermarket D-pad type stuff, so very nice. On the side here, we have a brightness on the top and a menu button, headphone/AV port, micro USB to charge and sync data. On the back, we've got a Nokia clone battery. You can't swap out the batteries very easily on the Pocket Go. This one, you can just bring many different Nokia clone batteries. They're very easy to obtain on eBay, etc. And then finally on this side as well, there's a volume wheel, the power switch, and a TF on the bottom. Behind the battery is where you will find the other micro SD card, which is included with the device. This has the firmware on there and the pre-installed games. On the back as well, you will actually see 2 speakers. This thing has stereo sound, which is a plus over the Pocket Go. So that's another thing to consider. And I must say, the speakers in this thing are very nice. When it comes to specifications of the technical stuff, I don't really tend to delve into it because I'm more of an end user than like an avid modder. I'm more of like a Game Boy enthusiast, to be honest with you, so all the other stuff that this can emulate is not really something I'm personally going to use, but I'll show you for the sake of the review. So this thing runs on Open Dingo, which is I believe the same as the Pocket Go, which is a Linux-based software. The display is a 2.7-inch TFT screen with a 4:3 aspect ratio, a resolution of 240 by 320, which is the same as the Pocket Go. The CPU is a JZ4760, which honestly, that goes straight over my head. It's got 128 meg of DDR2 RAM, microSD expandable storage up to 128 gigabytes, and a 5V 1020 milliamp hour battery. But those sort of specifications aren't something I personally care a lot about. I just want to see if this thing is good or not. It takes a few seconds to power up, and when it does, it's nothing that we haven't seen before. It's got a very similar skin to the Pocket Go. So as I said, they do look very similar in terms of the software. The biggest problem with the Pocket Go is the refresh rate. The screen has a 30 Hertz refresh rate, and this one is 60 Hertz. Now that might mean to some people that this is better, but hold your horses. Let me show you 2 side-by-sides of the same game Mario Kart showing on each screen. On the Pocket Go, the screen is way more vibrant and has a better pixel density than the one on the LDK. Now bear in mind, both of these things are pretty cheap, but the Pocket Go is half the price. So in terms of still image, the Pocket Go absolutely smashes the LDK out of the park. But when it comes to actual gameplay, you'll see that the screen tearing on a horizontal side-scrolling game on the Pocket Go is way more obvious than it is on the LDK. Now, some of these things might be improved with later firmware revisions, but some of it is down to the lack of RAM outputting the image from the CPU. So there is a couple of things that you definitely need to consider if you're an absolute avid Pokemon lover and you just want to buy this thing to play Pokemon Red or Pokemon Emerald or something on a Game Boy emulator. You're probably going to be alright. If you absolutely love Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, for example, and you want to run along at high speeds and not notice anything, go for the LDK. There's going to be a lot of pros and cons on both of these things, so you really need to do your own research and find out which one is going to suit you more. I'm not going to mention the Pocket Go again in this bloody video. Let's get on to the LDK. So finally into a bit of gameplay. This is Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. If I pull it up to the camera real close, you will see there that the screen does look very nice. It's not quite like the same as the Pocket Go and the original Game Boy in the sense that the pixels are all square. This is something else which I really don't know how to actually explain, but for those of you who are like wizards, you'll know. But to the naked, untrained eye, it looks pretty good. And that's all that really matters. On this side, as I mentioned earlier, there is a settings button. The top one is brightness, so you can adjust that. And then this one is the settings, and this is where you can load and save the state. So if I wanted to save the game, click in here, click on slot 0, and it will save it. And then if I come back into this game later and I want to load it, you go load state, select that, and it will load and literally load you back into where you were. The other settings are the probably more important ones in terms of visuals. So if you go down to video, you will see the different scaling options and color palettes. So you can go over to select color palette. There's a bunch of different ones down there. I don't really care about that. I'm quite happy with the black and white one. The one you're probably going to care about more is the upscaler. Now if I go over to native and then click save, and come out of the settings, you will see this tiny little box in the middle. Now this will actually be the highest quality. Now, not saying that you're going to want to play it at that tiny little thing, but it is the higher quality one. So if you're super authentic and you want to play it like that, then of course you can, but that's a little bit silly. So the one that I have found is the nicest is, if you go to upscaler, and then you go scale 3 times sample 0.75. What this actually does is applies a little bit of a sort of smoothness to the edges of the screen, so the different pixels are slightly smoothened over. Now this personally I think looks a bit better, and if I show you the side scroll there, as you can see there is pretty much no screen tear. For these sorts of games and Pokemon, the analog stick is actually very, very useful. There's hardly any latency, nothing at all noticeable compared to the D-pad. But when you're wandering around and you need to, change directions, it's actually a lot smoother on the fingers to be using an analog stick than it is with this D-pad. So if you are looking at getting either this or the LDK, the original one, and if you're a Pokemon player or a Zelda sort of RPG player, you probably want to get the one with the analog stick. And I must say, I've never played this game before with an analog stick. It feels pretty nice, to be honest with you. But honestly, as I said before, I'm a Game Boy enthusiast. This is a lovely bloody way to play Link's Awakening. To show you a little bit of Game Boy Color, here is Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. Now I've currently got this on the sort of native, just scaled up, but honestly I do prefer the sort of slightly smoothed edged scalar sort of setting. If it's this one right here, I don't really know how to describe all of this technical stuff, but if I show you a side by side of that, you will see that the smoothened out one does look quite nice. Some people probably aren't going to be a big fan of that, but on this specific screen, I would actually choose that one. On the Pocket Go, oh, for goodness sake, on the Pocket Go, because it actually has more defined square pixels like the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color, you probably wouldn't need to smooth the edges because the square edges are going to be nice enough as they are. It's so difficult to talk and play, it's unbelievable. So it's going to depend, as I mentioned before, on what your personal preferences are. Unfortunately, the side scrolling on the Pocket Go isn't great. For Game Boy Advance, let's take a look at Mario Kart Super Circuit. This game runs very, very nicely on this device, especially with the analog stick. I'm a huge fan of Mario Kart on the Game Boy Advance, so it's quite nice to play it on this. At the moment, I currently have it in the full screen setting, which for those of you who don't care that much about the screen quality is probably the one you're going to want to play it on. Through this camera at this distance, it looks pretty good, but let me just quickly change it to the native size. This is the actual native size of the game, which is probably a little bit more familiar to the sort of Game Boy Micro players. This is actually about the same size as the Game Boy Micro screen, so this looks pretty good. It looks better on the Pocket Go because of those square pixels compared to these sort of diagonal triangular things. So again, another thing to consider, but it still looks pretty good, and I'm doing very bad looking through this viewfinder. Here's a little bit more Game Boy Advance for those of you who are more interested in the Game Boy Advance stuff. This is Astro Boy, which is a slightly more demanding Game Boy Advance title, and as you can see, it looks great. Let's try it with the joystick. A little bit difficult with this game because it requires more definitive directional presses in order to do the moves, but yeah, looks really, really nice and works very well. As for Super Nintendo or Super Famicom, this looks pretty good, to be fair. I really like the way that this looks. The colors are great. It's all running at the same speeds, especially, well, just off the top of my head, I haven't got a side-by-side comparison, but none of these things have been running faster or slower. If it can play Game Boy Advance, it can definitely play Super Famicom. This seems to be pretty good. I haven't actually seen any sort of screen issues, but that might be because I'm looking through the viewfinder and it's a little bit different, so you probably might see some differences to me in the actual video, but you just have to, make a judgment for yourself. Now, another console I'm very, very fond of is the Wonder Swan, and I have to say I'm pretty underwhelmed by the WonderSwan performance. Again, that sort of thing is just going to be the emulator. Like, this isn't going to be a sort of testament to the LDK. There's a huge community around these sorts of devices, so any problems now will probably get ironed out later. But I was a little bit gutted to think that out of the box, this isn't perfect yet. One of the biggest problems, I guess, I can notice is the audio. This doesn't quite sound right. Which gets me worried because I haven't got any ROMs to play PlayStation 1 because I don't actually own any PlayStation 1 games and I don't want to upset anyone. So yeah, a little bit concerned maybe about some of the other stuff. All of the games that I've shown, I own the actual hard copy games for. I just don't want to get anyone upset by, you know, not playing a game that I actually own, because that would be illegal. But yeah, it looks pretty good. It just doesn't sound too great. At the moment as well, it's upscaled to fit this screen. If I change the size to the native WonderSwan screen, it's going to be absolutely tiny. So this doesn't actually look too great either. But again, it's probably not something that a lot of people are going to care about because there wasn't a huge sort of WonderSwan release that people are going to be familiar with. But yeah, just another thing to note. In terms of Neo Geo Pocket, it runs very, very nicely. This is the sort of game where you would actually see quite a lot of like screen tear from side scrolling and stuff, and there's a lot of fast-paced stuff in Sonic, but this looks very, very nice, which is really, really good because, again, as a handheld sort of enthusiast, the Neo Geo Pocket is something I collect for, and this is a really, really nice game to play, and it runs very well on the LDK. Also looks very, very nice, and it sounds great too. I guess the final thing then to show off is the NES or Famicom. This is Super Mario World 3, and yeah, looks very, very good. No problems at all. This is obviously going to be able to hack the NES or Famicom rather, because it's a super low-powered console. But yeah, this looks great, sounds great, feels great, but I'm just really bad at it playing through this viewfinder. That then is pretty much going to conclude this video review of the LDK. It is going to be personal preference whether or not you're going to get the Pocket Go or the LDK. Remember, this one is pretty much half the price, and also remember that both of these things, the prices are going to reduce over time. When the original BitBoy came out, it was like 50 quid, and then you can pick it up for like 30 after a couple months, so keep that in mind. The overall build quality of this is not as good as the Pocket Go. You know, plastic screen lens. This has got a glass one. The plastic on this is sort of like a matte finish, and I really like the silver. You know, they've gone through 3 molds to make this thing, not including the buttons, whereas on this one it's 2. So there's lots of different things. It means that this is a nicer finished product than this. But when it actually comes to playing games, this one is a little bit nicer just for that side scrolling and quick action sort of stuff. But if you're into like Zelda and Pokemon like me and you want to play this for Game Boy, this is very, very nice. Neither of these things run PlayStation 1 extremely well. They do run it. It is capable of doing it. It's probably pushing it a little bit. But yeah, very, very happy with this. Thanks again to Brandon for sending that out. Thanks again to you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'll leave the links to purchase both of these things as well as additional batteries in the description below. And if you enjoyed the video and you're new to the channel, please subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.